good morning.
Yeah.
We are pre-recording this session for our Region 2 Leadership Retreat, and we are so gracious and fortunate to have a very special guest this morning, Kim Johnson. She's a certified public accountant who I've known for quite some time, and she's going to assist us with educating our region about this 501c3. So I was the vice chair the previous 2 years, and we've had a lot of questions about 501c3, of which Region 2, we are a 501c3, but for the local and the local chapters, the state chapters, the societies, this question has come up. And so we're going to get some professional expertise this morning to address this. The good news is Kim Johnson is recording this for us this morning. She also has volunteered to be a resource for us moving forward if we have more questions and concerns, and we can address those at those times. But so we're gonna go ahead and get started. So first, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kim Johnson, certified public accountant. She can give some more detail. We're going to, she can go ahead and say hello to us. Good morning first.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Glad to be here and hope that I can be a resource to address your questions and concerns.
Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And first, we actually need some more clarity about just what is a 501c3 and what does it mean organizationally for the National Medical Association, regionally and at the local and societal levels.
So a 501c3 is basically, it's recognized by the Internal Revenue Service. 501c3 is an Internal Revenue Service code. That's where that comes from. And it basically establishes the classification by which you would be taxed or not taxed. And 501c3 organizations are typically charitable organizations. Included in that are churches and even hospitals as well. So they're different. There are a variety, even some colleges and universities are also fall under that, as it also included many small nonprofit organizations. The reason for that classification is it gives you the opportunity to receive gifts that are not taxable. When they talk about being a tax exempt organization, it basically means that you're exempt from income tax. So the income or the revenues that come into the organization are not taxable the same way if it was a corporation or a for-profit business where you would have to pay tax on that income. It also allows you to file for sales tax exemption in the state. One thing to kind of touch on there is that a 501c3 tax exemption by the IRS does not automatically make you tax exempt by your state. So whatever state that you're doing business in, you also would have to file for that tax exemption there for your purchases or to do business in that state. So there's just a little bit of a clarification there. One of the biggest things is that with the 501c3 status, it allows you to accept donations and be able to declare those donations as tax deductible. So, donors, they want to donate to a 501c3 because they get that tax deduction. If you don't have that status, you can't offer that donor that that benefit. So that's obviously one of the benefits there. It also just some other things in terms of when you're doing business. If you establish a 501c3, it takes away from any liability personally of any of the members of the organization, because that liability is now, you would have a governing board. And so it would raise to that level, but then you would also go into, and there's, things to obviously protect from that, because you would then get certain insurances to cover you for that. So that's kind of like the general overview. One other thing, in terms of grants. So to distinguish you from the higher level or the regional that is already a 501c3, for your local level would then be able to apply for grants on their own and be able to actually benefit from grants without having to utilize the larger organization and then have to create whatever partnership or relationship with them. You would be able to benefit solely for whatever grants that you apply for. So that's kind of like the overview, big picture.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Can you tell us what the organizational requirements are to obtain a 501c3 status?
So in most cases, particularly when you're small, you don't necessarily have to have paid staff. A lot of small organizations, everything's volunteer. You would need a board, and that can consist as little as 3 or 4 members, but you basically need to assemble a body that would be considered the governance of the organization. And that way, whenever, like if you establish a bank account under the organization's name, you would, that governing body would have to pass, like in their minutes, there would have to be a resolution passed to say that we approve, Dr. Carol Guy to open this account. The bank would not open that account in that name unless that document exists. So that governing board is basically established to set forth, whatever, to be the authority and to give outside entities such as banks and other entities that you would do business with, that would basically let them know that this is a legitimate authority that is granting you to open this account or to do business on behalf of. So that's kind of like where, a starting place is just to have a board. And then obviously to go through the process of the application with the IRS. So you would have your bylaws, and in your bylaws, again, your bylaws would kind of dictate how many board members that you want to have. You can always add to that, but it's always a good idea to just start at a minimum, because again, these are volunteers, right? And so you're requesting their time, and to establish how often does the board need to meet. I would say normally it's like a month, but some boards meet quarterly, depending on the size of the organization. It's not always needed to be monthly. And then you would apply, you would do the application. If you're starting at the local level, it's probably going to be small enough to do an easy form, it's a form 1023. IRS form EZ, and that's the application to go through the process of starting the 501c3. There is a fee involved, I believe, for the EZ. That fee is like $275, I think, is where it stands right now. Process usually takes 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes quicker. It really just depends on the time of year and the volume at that time. If there's other things going on, like right now, there are, because of the storms and things, there's always like things that cause a lot more volume to come at one time. So depending on what's going on at that time of year, or when you submit your application, how long it takes, but typically it's like 4 to 6 weeks.
So after if you decide, the local chapter society decides they would like to be 501c3, and they do the application process, what is involved in maintaining the 501c3 status?
So maintaining, it depends on the volume of revenue. So if you're within $25,000, you would file a annual, what they call the postcard. So it's really like a couple of questions that you check off, and you submit that to the IRS, and you're done for that year. You do have to file every single year, whether it's the postcard. If you grow in revenue, you may get to where you actually have to file the Form 990, which is a lot more, a lot more to that form. Typically, the filing is the 15th day of the 5th month after your year ends. So if you are on a calendar year, meaning your year ends on December 31st, your annual filing would be due May 15th. And that's kind of like how that goes. You can always file for an extension. Typically, if you're under $25,000, you probably wouldn't need the extension, because it literally takes a couple seconds to fill out that form. But that's like one of the biggest things, is that filing. Now, there are other things that are required state by state. So if you are a 501c3 organization, and let's just say that your website, you're doing business in Delaware, let's just say. And so if you're established in Delaware and you have a website and you have a fundraiser going on your website, if you're not granted charitable status in that state. And sometimes the state taxing agencies, they look at websites, right? And they see that you are actually soliciting donations for anything, and they look and you don't have a registry in that state, you could get fined. So, and I say that to say just having the 501c3 status, that gives you federal status. So that is a federal, basically a federal filing, a federal authority, right? Each state is different, and so you definitely want to know what are the laws or rules of your state to also be able to solicit funds. So that could also, and that usually runs in tandem with the IRS. So if you are filing charitable status in your state, typically when you go to file your annual return with the government, with the federal government, you would also file that as well.
Thank you, Kim. That's extremely helpful. So what are there other designations besides 501c3 that could be helpful to the National Medical Association, local societies, or a regional society?
Mm-hmm. So there are, I would say the 501c3 gives you the broader in terms of being a charitable organization and being able to accept donations that you can declare tax deductible. There are other, for example, there's the 501c6, which is basically usually that's like a business where like a chamber of commerce or like an organization that brings businesses together, but that organization itself is a nonprofit, even though it's organizing for-profit businesses. So that's a C6. You have the C7, which is social organizations like sororities and fraternities. There are also, it's for organizations that are formed more for recreation. And so based on the things, a lot of what I've heard from you all so far and what you're trying to do, it probably makes the most sense to be a C3. If you want to do fundraisers, if you're doing anything you're doing for a charitable purpose, that's really how you determine where you would fall, is what is the purpose of what you want to do.
If the local society is small, what can they do if they want to have a fundraiser? Can they simply use the regional or the national NMA to have their fundraiser? Because the regional has a 501c3 designation, as does the National Medical Association.
So that's a good question. And that's really an internal question that needs to be resolved within the organization. So if you're doing something, because obviously if you're having a fundraiser or you're doing an event, but you're utilizing the larger 501c3, they're going to then dictate or govern what you can do. There may be a cost sharing or a revenue sharing component to that. So those are things that you definitely would have to work out internally. And that also could be a deciding factor on whether or not you want to go out on your own. There's some benefit to staying in this, under the net. It's kind of like, you're like the parent-child relationship where there's some comforts of staying home. But also there's some independence of going out on your own. But when you go out on your own, then you're incurring all of your costs. The liability now comes under the smaller organization. So you don't have that same protection.
What could be some of the pros and cons for the local societies to or not to have a 501c3?
So the pros are actually, like I was saying, to have your own ability to do fundraising where it's all up under you. There's also, there are things like certain discounts. So for example, we were talking like even with technology, typically 501c3 organizations, they get discounts for certain softwares, things like that. So because you're recognized as a charitable organization. Because of that, you have businesses that will, oh, you're a 501c3, we're going to discount. We have certain products that we would offer you that at a discount. And again, like the biggest thing is being able to accept donations and offer the donor a tax. They would get a tax deduction. So you would basically, if you have, let's just say you have an annual campaign, you know how they have Giving Tuesday, right? And so let's just say if your organization participates in Giving Tuesday, you would be able to send letters, acknowledgement letters back out and letting, you know, thank you for your donation of such and such, whatever. And then when they file their taxes, they would have the benefit of adding that donation to their tax deductions. Just to add to that, it makes it more appealing. So the idea that someone can do a tax deduction, get a tax deduction, that makes donating to you more appealing than if you were not a tax exempt organization.
Yes, so for example, in our region too, we know that the Philadelphia Medical Society of Eastern Pennsylvania has a lovely website, which has a quite nice button where you can push and make it easy to make a donation. It tells you that we are a 501c3 organization. So that could be one way that maybe all the local chapters interested in 501c3 could consider, that you can even, like you said earlier, Kim, that you could put it on your website, take a donation. And the National Medical Association has revamped their website, and there also is a donor button there. So that is something to consider when seeking funding. And so that could be helpful too, that people say this organization is a 501c3, and when they come and push the button and make a donation, that is something great. So we talked about some myths around the 501c3. Kim, do you have any thoughts around what are some myths about 501c3s?
So one of the biggest myths, I think, is that because it's a nonprofit, right, that you can't show a profit. And that is a big myth. So you don't have to break even, meaning whatever you come in has to go out the door. You can retain earnings through, you know, year over year. What the nonprofit basically means is that in a for-profit or a for-profit company, those profits get to go back out. For example, if it's a corporation, right, and it's a public company with stockholders, those profits basically go back and they get distributed to the owners. Even a small business, the owner gets to gets the profits distributed back to them. With a nonprofit, there is no ownership. And so the profits, basically the surplus, if you will, stays in the organization. It does not get, it's not like the organization then come, oh, okay, we're going to distribute, how much did we earn this year? We're going to distribute it to all the board members. That is not legal within a nonprofit. That's the distinction. Not that you can't earn and actually grow, because you can't grow your organization if every dime that comes in goes right back out. So you do want to be able to grow. The healthier the nonprofit is on paper, the more attractive it becomes for donors, for grantors. So if you're applying for a specific grant, they're going to ask for your financial statements. If they see that you never are operating at a surplus, they may not deem you to be healthy. Whereas, as you build funds and retain funds, they see you as being a more viable or healthy organization. So that is, that's probably, I would say, the biggest myth. And the other thing is where as you grow, you can have paid staff. Like some people think the organization has to be solely volunteer. In most cases, that's how you would start out, because you wouldn't have the funds to really pay a staff. But as you grow and nonprofits start to grow, where your work and the requirements go beyond the getting just everybody volunteering, like, oh, we really have to hire somebody to run work the website or to do whatever. That's where you can have paid staff. So you can function. Your financial statements can look very similar to a for-profit, except the difference is what you do, how you handle those profits. That's the biggest difference.
When it comes to 501c3s and receiving donations in kind for services rendered, how does that work for, let's say, an individual who comes in to a meeting or what have you and gives a presentation and has an honorarium and is willing to receive that honorarium as a donation in kind that they can write off. Is that lawful under 501c3?
It is. So 501c3s, that's a really great question. You do have to report on your financial statements in kind. So if someone provides a service, you have an accountant or a lawyer or someone like that, a professional, they would basically, or like you said, if it's a speaker, it's an honorarium, whatever you valued that to be, you would record that as both a revenue and an expense. So it's an offset on your financial statements, but you do have to show that we got an in-kind contribution. And that's as a revenue. And then on the expense side, it would show as an in-kind expense. So it doesn't have a net effect on your financials, but yes, you do have to show that and then that way that person is able to get that deduction.
And that's an excellent question, Dr. Jefferson, because I actually was going to ask that in a similar question, because that's important, because that may help people to help volunteer for us if they can get a deduction for their time they have provided, their expertise and time they have provided.
I see it a lot with legal. Yeah, I do. I see that a lot with nonprofits, with legal services. Sometimes even with, with accounting services. Like I said, it is required though to be reported.
So that's something important that maybe we need to consider moving. That was a great question. And I think that we could all make sure we record those and report that. So if the experts that provide the services can get a, you could say, would you say deduction for their time? Is that what it's?
So they would benefit, they would be donating their time.
Right.
And they would value that time. So if it's an attorney, and let's just say they charge $300 an hour and they gave you 2 hours, they would value that as you would record on your books that you received in-kind contribution of $600.
Right.
So,
Thank you, Kim.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think the recording of it is important, that we at the regional level and at the local level record these things and actually suggest to people that to do donate our time, we can actually record it so that it's something too that may help us to continue the assistance of or to assist us. Is a great. So that's great, Dr. Jefferson, that you brought that point up. So I want to thank you this morning for your time, Kim. It has been excellent. Your time and expertise has been very valuable to the regional and the local chapters of the National Medical Association. And we look forward to working with you in the future. And so we just thank you this morning.
You're
and
quite
everyone have a
welcome.
wonderful.
Thanks for
Thank
having me.